People usually think power is loud, slamming fists on mahogany tables. They are wrong. True power is terrifyingly quiet. It is the silent transmission of a single encrypted file and the cold realization in a billionaire's eyes that the woman he humiliated is the executioner. When Julian Vance tipped his glass over my dress, he thought he was putting me in my place. He never knew I had just bought the floor he was standing on. Hello, dear listeners of Boss Revenge Stories. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for your unwavering support over the years. Unfortunately, YouTube has permanently disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us with zero budget to continue operating, which means we must inevitably stop uploading new videos here for the foreseeable future and shift our entire operation over to Patreon. If you find yourself captivated by today's story, please consider supporting us by joining our Patreon community, where you can listen to exclusive, true stories that are even more thrilling and significantly longer, featuring intricate details we simply cannot publish on YouTube, all performed by a diverse cast of highly emotional voice actors. You can join our inner circle right now by scanning the QR code currently displayed on your screen, or by clicking the Patreon link securely pinned in the video description or the comments section below. Now, let us begin today's story. Stepping into the meticulously calculated world of Lila Alexander, the air at the Vance family's private ranch in Austin, Texas, was thick with the scent of roasted mesquite, blooming jasmine, and the sharp, metallic tang of unearned arrogance. This was not just a party, it was a high-security gala, a glittering, diamond-studded masquerade designed to celebrate the impending $1.8 billion acquisition of Arrow Yield, a revolutionary drone agriculture company. My firm, Vanguard Horizon, was the buyer. The sprawling estate was crawling with industry reporters, tech moguls, and venture capitalists, all buzzing under canopies of fairy lights draped across ancient oak trees. They moved like sharks in expensive suits, their smiles perfectly calibrated, their eyes constantly scanning the room for weakness. I stood quietly near a towering, intricately carved ice sculpture of a soaring drone, watching the charade unfold. I am 34 years of age and the laid-risk architect for Vanguard. My job was not to celebrate. My job was to find the cracks in the foundation, to unearth the liabilities that companies like Arrow Yield desperately tried to bury before a buyout of this magnitude. I was the absolute architect of the strict compliance structures that were about to lock a leash around the necks of Arrow Yield's executives. That was precisely why Julian Vance despised me. Julian was the arrogant, notoriously reckless son of Arrow Yield's founder. He was a man who had never been told the word no in his entire life. As I sipped my sparkling water, I saw him cutting through the crowd. He was flanked by his usual entourage of yes-men and sycophants, his face flushed with expensive liquor and blinding entitlement. He locked eyes with me from across the patio, his sneer sharp and predatory. Julian hated the corporate oversight Vanguard demanded. More specifically, he hated me, because I had personally drafted the ironclad behavioral and financial clauses that would severely limit his access to the incoming capital. He stopped right in front of me, invading my personal space, holding a dangerously full crystal glass of robust Texas Sierra. The entourage formed a half circle, boxing me in, drawing the immediate attention of nearby journalists and several of his father's key board members. Lila, Lila, Lila. Julian projected his voice loudly, ensuring everyone within a 20-foot radius could hear him. Still standing in the corner like a glorified accountant, tell me, do they teach you how to ruin the spirit of innovation at whatever state school you crawled out of? Or is your lack of pedigree just a natural talent? The murmurs around us grew louder, a wave of whispers rippling through the elite crowd. He was testing the fence, pushing to see if I would bite. I offered him a polite, entirely hollow smile. Innovation requires discipline, Julian. Something Vanguard intends to establish by tomorrow morning, I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of the intimidation he was hoping to provoke. That calm defiance was the spark that ignited his fragile ego. To assert his dominance in front of the flashing cameras of the reporters and the watchful eyes of the Arrow Yield board members, Julian took a sudden, deliberate step forward with a flick of his wrist. He tipped the crystal glass perfectly downward. A torrent of dark, heavy red wine splashed violently against my collarbone, soaking instantly into the delicate fabric of my pristine white silk blouse. The deep crimson stain spread like an open wound across my chest, ruining the expensive garment in a fraction of a second. The physical shock of the cold liquid was sharp, but the psychological strike was meant to be fatal. "Oh, my absolute apologies, Lila," Julian gasped, though his tone was dripping with mocking theatricality. "My hand just completely slipped, but I suppose a little color might actually help you blend in with the rest of us." The jazz band playing on the distant stage seemed to fade away. The immediate vicinity fell completely, suffocatingly silent. Forks stopped clinking against porcelain plates. Conversations died mid-sentence. The entire circle of elite guests, reporters, and executives held their breath, their eyes fixed firmly on me. They were waiting for the inevitable breakdown. They waited for me to gasp, to cry, to scream indignantly, or to cover my face and flee toward the restrooms in absolute, crushing shame. That was the script. That was the emotional reaction Julian fed upon to build his reputation as the untouchable Prince of Austin. I felt the cold wine dripping down my skin, pooling at my waist. I did not flinch. I did not cross my arms to hide the massive stain. I did not break eye contact with Julian Vance. The silence stretched, heavy and expectant, shifting from my humiliation to his sudden, creeping discomfort. Slowly, moving with the deliberate grace of a predator, I reached out and took a small, crisp cocktail napkin from a passing waiter's tray. I gently dabbed a single drop of wine off my wrist. I let the napkin flutter to the stone floor. I looked Julian dead in the eye, my expression chillingly vacant. "That was the most expensive drink you will ever pour," I stated quietly, my voice slicing through the silent Texas air like a scalpel. Julian barked out a harsh, echoing laugh that shattered the remaining tension within his immediate circle. He genuinely believed my warning was nothing more than the empty, pathetic threat of a powerless corporate bureaucrat trying to salvage her dignity, turning his back to me completely. He lifted his empty hand in a mock salute to his sycophants, who immediately erupted into obedient, echoing chuckles. They clapped him on the shoulder, congratulating him on his manufactured victory, their attention already drifting back toward the open bar and the trays of passing champagne. The normal human response to having a massive, dark stain dominating a white silk blouse would be a frantic retreat. The social expectation dictated that I should rush to the nearest powder room, desperately scrubbing at the ruined fabric with club soda and tears, effectively erasing myself from the narrative. I did not move a single inch. I firmly refused to leave the room to change. Remaining perfectly visible in the center of the gala was a deeply calculated psychological tactic. By standing exactly where I was, radiating absolute, unyielding composure, the visual shock of the ruined dress ceased to be a symbol of my humiliation. Instead, it transformed into an anchor of creeping discomfort for everyone else. Every time a board member or a tech reporter glanced my way, they did not see a victim shrinking into the shadows. They saw a woman who was entirely unbothered by an alpha male's desperate display of dominance. I was forcing the tension to remain heavily fixed on them, not on my stained clothes. Reaching smoothly into my tailored blazer, I pulled out my secure company device. My thumb pressed against the biometric scanner, instantly unlocking the screen. The interface was austere, a stark, clinical contrast to the glittering party surrounding me. I bypassed the standard communications applications and opened the heavily encrypted Vanguard Horizon executive portal. The connection routed silently through 3 separate private servers before granting me maximum terminal access. I navigated past the primary acquisition summaries and dove straight into the deeply buried subdirectories of the master contract. My fingers moved with surgical precision, locating a very specific, heavily fortified clause that I had personally drafted and embedded deep within the final agreement. It was titled the Morality and Material Hazard Protocol. This protocol was not a standard boilerplate edition. It was a digital guillotine. I designed it specifically for volatile, unpredictable entities like the Vance family, tying personal executive conduct directly to the structural integrity of the entire financial payout. It bypassed mediation entirely, opening a secure direct line to my chief legal counterpart, sitting in a high-rise office in Chicago. I typed a single, decisive word: execute. I pressed send. There was no loading bar, no dramatic animation on the screen, just a tiny, silent checkmark confirming delivery. With that single keystroke, I had just initiated an absolute hard stop on the escrow transfer of the $1.8 billion that was scheduled to be released to Arrow Yield at exactly midnight. The massive flow of capital, authorized and primed by international banking consortiums, slammed violently into an invisible concrete wall. I slid the phone back into my pocket and clasped my hands calmly in front of me, watching the room with predatory stillness, the shift from an emotional public spectacle to the cold, mechanical reality of modern corporate warfare was instantaneous, even if the targets did not realize they were bleeding yet. It took exactly 45 seconds for the financial ecosystem of the gala to detect the catastrophic disruption. First, it was the chief financial officer of Arrow Yield. He was mid-laugh near the buffet table when he suddenly paused, glancing down at his wrist as his smartwatch aggressively vibrated. A second later, the general counsel sitting near the jazz stage frowned deeply, reaching into his tuxedo pocket to retrieve a buzzing smartphone. Then, it happened in a synchronized, terrifying wave. One by one, the phones and smartwatches of every single board member, senior partner, and financial officer associated with Arrow Yield began to vibrate simultaneously. The collective buzzing sounded like a swarm of angry hornets descending upon the patio. The sycophantic laughter surrounding Julian abruptly died. The smug, victorious smile completely vanished from his flushed face as he looked around, entirely confused by the sudden, frantic shift in the atmosphere. Men in expensive tailored suits were suddenly pale, aggressively tapping their glowing screens, their eyes widening with sheer panic. Before Julian could even formulate a question, a heavy hand clamped down violently on his arm. It was his father, Arthur Vance. The patriarch of the family physically spun his son around, his grip so brutally tight that his knuckles were bone white. Arthur was not looking at my ruined shirt or his son's arrogant smirk. Arthur was staring with unfiltered horror at an emergency push alert radiating from their lead investment bank. The notification was blindingly clear. Their access to the bridging funds had just been entirely revoked. Panic is a fascinating contagion. Unlike excitement, which builds slowly, panic moves like an electric shock. Within minutes, the glittering facade of the gala began to disintegrate. Rumors of the frozen funds leaped from frantic whispers to urgent, hissed conversations behind ornate floral arrangements. Executives who had just been toasting to their impending wealth were now pacing frantically near the perimeter hedges, barking into their phones in desperate, hushed tones. Through it all, the live jazz band on the main stage kept playing a lively, upbeat tempo, completely oblivious to the financial slaughter occurring right in front of them. The cheerful brass and rhythmic upright bass created a deeply surreal, claustrophobic atmosphere. It felt like watching a luxury ocean liner slowly sinking while the string quartet enthusiastically played on. I stepped away from the main patio, moving toward the quiet, dimly lit corridors of the main estate house. I needed a moment away from the frantic energy, but I knew exactly who would follow me. The heavy oak doors closed behind me, cutting off the jazz music. A moment later, they swung open again. "Lila, sweetheart, please hold on a second." A deep, heavily accented voice echoed down the hallway. It was Arthur Vance. The silver-haired patriarch was moving remarkably fast for a man of his age, his usually immaculate tuxedo looking slightly rumpled around the collar. He cornered me near a display of antique revolvers, his broad shoulders physically blocking the exit. Arthur had built his empire on a very specific brand of Southern gentleman charm, a folksy, disarming persona that expertly masked a ruthless corporate predator. Right now, that mask was slipping. "Let us take a deep breath and just talk this through like rational adults," Arthur began, his voice dripping with honeyed diplomacy, though his eyes were wide and frantic. "I know my boy acted like an absolute fool out there. He has a temper, and he was out of line. But freezing the entire escrow? Halting a $1.8 billion acquisition over a spilled glass of wine? That is a nuclear reaction to a social faux pas. Leela, you are going to ruin years of hard work for thousands of people because your feelings got hurt." He stepped closer, lowering his voice into a gravelly, veiled threat. "You have to know how this looks to your superiors. I will personally drag Julian out to the center of that patio and fire him in front of every reporter in the state of Texas, if that is what you want. I will write you a blank check for the dry cleaning and whatever emotional distress you feel you have suffered. Just pick up your phone, call your people in Chicago, and push the green button. Turn the money back on. Lila, before this gets entirely out of hand." I looked at the older man, studying the beads of sweat forming on his forehead. The desperation of old money realizing the rules had suddenly changed was palpable. "Mr. Vance," I replied, my voice completely flat and devoid of any reciprocal emotion. "Vanguard Horizon does not deal in apologies, and we certainly do not deal in public relations theater. We deal strictly in risk assessment. Your son did not hurt my feelings. Your son proved, in front of your entire board, that he lacks impulse control, basic judgment, and respect for legal oversight. He demonstrated that the Vance family is an unmanageable liability. I did not freeze the funds out of spite. I froze them because you are no longer a safe investment." Arthur's jaw tightened, the southern charm evaporating instantly, before he could unleash whatever venom he was holding back. Heavy footsteps pounded down the corridor. Julian skidded to a halt next to his father, breathless, and looking frantically between the two of us. The arrogant smirk was entirely gone, replaced by the cornered panic of a man watching his inheritance burn to the ground. "Dad, you cannot listen to her," Julian blurted out, his voice cracking with hysteria. "She is insane. I did not just spill the wine to be a jerk. She threatened me." Arthur blinked, turning to his son in confusion. "What are you talking about, Julian?" Julian pointed a trembling finger at me, spinning a desperate, on-the-spot fabrication. "Earlier, by the bar, she cornered me. She said Vanguard was going to gut the company, fire you, and strip our assets the second the ink dried. She was whispering all this crazy, vindictive stuff. When she approached me again near the ice sculpture, I panicked. The wine spill was an accident. I was just trying to get away from her because she was acting completely unhinged. It was a pathetic, easily disprovable lie. But I did not interrupt him. I watched the wheels turning in Arthur Vance's head. Arthur knew his son was lying, but Arthur also knew that truth was entirely irrelevant in corporate warfare. What mattered was the narrative. Almost immediately, Arthur pulled his phone out and fired off a rapid text message. Within 5 minutes, as I walked back out toward the edges of the gala, I saw the Vance Crisis Public Relations team springing into action. They moved swiftly through the crowd of reporters and executives like shadows, planting highly calculated whispers. I watched as gazes shifted toward me again. This time, they were not looking at a stoic victor. They were looking at me with pity and concern. I could read their lips from across the lawn. Words like unstable, hysterical, and mental breakdown floated through the humid air. The PR team was aggressively spinning the narrative that the lead risk architect of Vanguard Horizon had snapped under the pressure and was maliciously sabotaging a completely legal, finalized deal over a simple, clumsy accident. The strategy became crystal clear. They were not trying to convince me to restart the transfer. They were laying the precise legal groundwork to invoke a rogue agent clause against me, by painting me as a highly unstable, vindictive employee acting outside of company interests. Arthur Vance intended to bypass my authority completely. His goal was to compile enough manufactured witness testimony tonight to appeal directly to Vanguard's chief executive officer by morning, forcing the deal through and having me terminated before the sun even came up. I slipped away from the escalating circus on the lawn, navigating the labyrinthine corridors of the main estate until I reached the temporary executive suite Vanguard had secured for the weekend. I closed the heavy mahogany door, engaging the deadbolt and instantly shutting out the faint, frantic thumping of the jazz bass that still echoed through the walls. The room was dark, illuminated only by the cold, sterile glow of my laptop screen as I flipped it open on the massive glass desk. I did not care about the ruined silk clinging tightly to my skin, smelling sharply of fermented grapes and crushed ego. I did not care about the character assassination currently being orchestrated in the gardens below, where public relations mercenaries were spinning a web of lies about my mental stability. I cared only about the data. Data never lied. Data did not throw tantrums. Using Vanguard's supreme audit privileges, which granted me absolute access during the final 48 hours of escrow, I bypassed Arrow Yield's external firewalls, like they were made of damp tissue paper. I dropped directly into their internal network logs, synchronizing their server history with our own active security matrices. I needed to see everything that had happened in the digital space during the exact 60 seconds surrounding the confrontation by the ice sculpture. Something was itching at the back of my mind, a nagging inconsistency that my risk assessment training refused to ignore. Julian was reckless, absolutely, but he was also fundamentally a coward. A public confrontation of that magnitude, with the industry press eagerly watching, was uncharacteristically bold, even for a spoiled heir. It felt entirely staged, a piece of aggressive street theater designed to force a very specific reaction. I ran a deep-level proximity sweep on my Vanguard security credentials, cross-referencing the physical location tracking of my biometric badge with server access requests across the entire estate. The screen scrolled rapidly, reflecting lines of green and white text across my face, filtering out the ambient noise of 1,000 smart devices connected to the Gala's wireless network. I isolated the geographic coordinates of the patio. Then, I found it, a massive, glaring anomaly hidden beneath the digital chaos of the party. At the exact moment the dark red wine hit my chest, while every eye in the courtyard was fixed on my ruined blouse, there was a localized, high-frequency radio frequency identification sweep initiated mere inches from my pocket. Someone in Julian's little entourage of sycophants was carrying a military-grade credential skimmer in their tuxedo jacket. The wine spill was never about humiliation. It was a calculated, desperate misdirection. While I was supposed to be blinded by shock, outrage, and the immediate urge to flee to a restroom, his associate was attempting to quietly clone my absolute clearance badge. My fingers flew across the keyboard, tracing the aborted digital pathway the cloned signal had tried to carve into Vanguard's primary servers. They had bypassed the lower-tier financial ledgers and aimed straight for the master acquisition documents housed in our Chicago data center. I pulled up the Delta file, revealing the exact lines of code they had attempted to inject into the final payout structure, just before my system's internal encryption recognized the counterfeit handshake and slammed the firewall shut. The sheer audacity of the attempted alteration was staggering, a clumsy smash and grab disguised as high-level corporate espionage. Julian was not just trying to change a few minor compliance clauses to get me off his back. He had attempted to hard-code a secret routing protocol designed to siphon exactly $200 million out of the bridging funds. He wrote a script to redirect that massive chunk of capital into a decentralized shell account based in the Cayman Islands, literally seconds before Vanguard was scheduled to take full operational control of the assets. I dove deeper, deploying a trace algorithm to follow the shell account's origin through a labyrinth of dummy corporations and blind trusts. It took less than 30 minutes to uncover the toxic, terrifying truth. Julian Vance was drowning in a catastrophic ocean of illicit debt. He had massively over-leveraged himself in unregulated offshore crypto derivatives and shadow market gambling syndicates. He owed money to creditors who did not send polite collection letters or file lawsuits, but rather organizations that liquidated assets with extreme, physical prejudice. The impending merger was his only lifeline. It was his only chance to steal enough liquid capital to save his own life, hoping to execute the theft without his father ever noticing the missing funds during the chaotic transition of a multi-billion-dollar buyout. I leaned back in the ergonomic leather chair, the ambient hum of the laptop fan, the only sound in the suffocatingly quiet room. A chilling realization settled over me. Arthur Vance had absolutely no idea. When Arthur cornered me in the hallway just moments ago, desperately offering to fire his son and write me a blank check, his panic was genuine, but his premise was entirely flawed. He truly believed his son was just an arrogant, hot-headed fool who had ruined a dress and bruised an executive's ego. Arthur was currently outside in the humid Texas night, deploying a massive public relations offensive, trying to win a battle of reputations. He was completely unaware that his son was an active felon, attempting to defraud a global financial institution just to keep a target off his own back. My secure tablet buzzed loudly on the desk. It was a forwarded notification from Vanguard's internal legal monitoring system. Arthur's legal team had already submitted a formal, highly aggressive complaint to my superiors. They were rapidly compiling witness statements from the gala, claiming I had suffered a severe psychological break, and they were demanding the deal be forced through by executive override before the markets opened. They were laying the groundwork for a massive lawsuit. I could have forwarded the server logs right then. I could have called the federal authorities and had Julian arrested on the lawn in front of the jazz band and the flashing cameras. But that would be too loud. That would give their expensive lawyers time to prepare a defense, to claim their systems were hacked by a third party, to muddy the waters with endless, exhausting litigation. Instead, I chose to let them build their aggressive, public legal case against me. I would allow them to construct their beautiful, elaborate trap, cementing their own hostile intent on the official record, and then I would let them confidently walk right into it. I opened a new message, addressing it directly to the senior partner of Arthur Vance's legal team. I deliberately kept my tone clipped, seemingly defeated, and profoundly cryptic. I acknowledge receipt of your complaints, I typed out slowly, letting the mechanical click of the keys echo in the room. I agreed to an emergency boardroom meeting at 6 o'clock in the morning at the Arrow Yield headquarters. Final terms will be settled then. I hit send. To them. The message was a clear white flag. They would read those words and believe I was surrendering, overwhelmed by the immense pressure and terrified of losing my career to their smear campaign. They would spend the rest of the night drinking champagne and celebrating their ruthless victory, completely blind to the executioner waiting for them at dawn. The dawn light over Austin was a pale, bruised purple when I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the Arrow Yield corporate headquarters at exactly 6 o'clock in the morning. The massive lobby was empty, silent, and aggressively air-conditioned, a sharp contrast to the humid, chaotic garden party from the night before. I walked toward the elevators with measured, deliberate steps. I was wearing a pristine, sharp charcoal suit, my hair pulled back with severe precision. Not a single trace of the previous night's disastrous encounter remained. There were no stains, no signs of panic, and absolutely no hesitation. When I entered the executive boardroom on the 50th floor, the visual contrast between the two factions was immediately striking. Arthur Vance, Julian, and a small army of high-priced corporate attorneys were already seated around the massive, polished mahogany table. The air in the room was thick with the smell of stale espresso and expensive, aggressive cologne. They looked physically exhausted. Their silk ties were loosened, their collars were unbuttoned, and their eyes were heavily bloodshot from a long, frantic night of damage control and legal strategizing. Yet, despite their ragged appearance, their collective posture radiated a triumphant, almost feral glow. They looked at me as if I were a wounded animal walking willingly into a cage. They genuinely thought they had successfully broken me. Julian was leaning far back in his ergonomic leather chair, chewing lazily on the cap of a silver pen. He offered me a slow, predatory smirk as I took my seat at the far end of the long table. In his mind, he had completely beaten the system. He firmly believed his fabricated narrative had worked flawlessly, successfully painting me as an emotional, hysterical woman who simply could not handle the immense pressure of high-stakes corporate negotiations. He thought his inheritance was secured. Arthur did not bother with any feigned pleasantries. He did not offer me coffee, or even attempt a fake Southern gentleman smile. He simply reached into the breast pocket of his tailored jacket, pulled out a thick cream-colored legal document, and slid it aggressively across the smooth wood surface toward me. A heavy rectangular piece of paper rested securely on top of it. "We drafted a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement," Arthur stated, his voice completely devoid of its usual warmth, sounding more like grinding gravel. "Right on top of it is a personal compensation check made out to you for exactly $5 million. This is not severance. Lila, this is a generous gift for your immediate, undisputed resignation, effective right this very second. In exchange, you will pick up that secure phone in front of you, call your board of directors in Chicago, and initiate the immediate release of the $1.8 billion into our accounts before the market opens at exactly 9:30. I looked down at the check resting under the glare of the recessed lighting. $5 million. To them, it was an irresistible bribe, a golden parachute meant to permanently silence a minor structural problem they believed they had thoroughly cornered. I did not reach out to touch the check. I did not even look at the intricately worded non-disclosure agreement. Instead, I smoothly reached into my leather briefcase and retrieved my sleek, silver laptop. I set it down squarely on the table, opened the screen, and plugged my system directly into the central boardroom projector, while the massive screen on the wall behind me hummed to life, projecting the stark, minimalist Vanguard Horizon logo. I opened my master security dashboard. With a few rapid keystrokes, I executed a localized lockdown command. The heavy magnetic locks on the glass boardroom doors engaged with a loud, definitive click that echoed sharply across the quiet room. Simultaneously, a localized signal jammer, completely legally sanctioned under Vanguard's corporate audit protocols for hostile environments, severed all cellular and external wireless network connections within the four walls of the suite. No one was leaving, and absolutely no one was communicating with the outside world. "What do you think you're doing?" one of Arthur's lead attorneys demanded. A tall, gaunt man who suddenly looked very alarmed by the harsh magnetic click of the door. I completely ignored him. I pulled up the real-time financial projections on the glowing projector screen. The graphs, escrow ledgers, and routing numbers materialized in crisp, high-definition resolution. "You assume we are here to negotiate the release of paused funds, Arthur." I finally spoke, my voice chillingly calm, projecting effortlessly across the long room. "You assume the capital is sitting safely in a holding account, just waiting for my verbal authorization to clear. I am projecting the live ledger for the Master Escrow Trust." Arthur leaned forward, squinting aggressively at the complex web of numbers displayed on the wall. The triumphant glow on his face began to fracture, rapidly replaced by a sudden, creeping confusion. "The balance is 0, Julian muttered, sitting up straight, the silver pen dropping from his mouth and clattering onto the table. "Where is the money?" "The funds have not just been paused," I stated, locking my eyes directly onto Arthur's pale face. "They have been entirely, irrevocably withdrawn from the escrow accounts. Vanguard Horizon has officially pulled all capital commitments from this acquisition." The sterile silence of the room shattered completely. The space erupted into a chaotic, deafening symphony of shouting attorneys. The gaunt lead lawyer leaped to his feet, slamming both of his palms violently onto the mahogany table, his face turning a dark, furious shade of red. "This is an absolute, unprecedented outrage," the lawyer roared, pointing a trembling finger furiously at my face. "You cannot unilaterally withdraw capital after the primary contracts have been signed. We will file a multi-billion-dollar breach of contract lawsuit before the lunch hour. We will drag Vanguard Horizon through federal court, and we will personally ensure that your professional life and your company's reputation are completely destroyed by noon. You are an emotional liability, and we have dozens of credible witnesses from last night to prove you acted out of sheer, unhinged malice." Julian jumped to his feet as well, his chest heaving, emboldened by his legal team's explosive and furious reaction. "You are done, Lila. Do you hear me? You are going to federal prison for financial sabotage." I sat perfectly still, letting their desperate, furious screams wash over me, completely unaffected. Let them shout. The trap was fully sprung, and the jaws were about to snap entirely shut. I did not raise my voice to compete with the deafening symphony of threats echoing off the glass walls. I simply pressed a single key on my laptop. The projector clicked, The minimalist Vanguard Horizon logo vanished from the massive wall behind me, instantly replaced by a high-definition, split-screen video feed. The sudden change in the stark lighting of the room caught the attention of the screaming attorneys. The gaunt lead lawyer stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging slightly open as he stared at the footage. The chaotic noise in the boardroom died instantly, replaced by a suffocating, terrifying silence. On the left side of the screen was the pristine, high-resolution security footage captured from the eaves of the estate patio the night before. It played silently, showing the exact moment Julian tipped his glass forward, the dark red wine splashing across my chest. On the right side of the screen was the telemetry data from Vanguard's localized security mesh. It displayed a glowing digital footprint of a high-frequency radio sweep radiating directly from the pocket of the man standing immediately to Julian's left. "You are correct about one thing, gentlemen," I stated smoothly, breaking the heavy silence. "I do not unilaterally withdraw capital over spilled wine, but I do withdraw it when the spill is a calculated distraction for a cyber breach." I tapped another key. The video feed shrank, making way for lines of stark, green code and heavily encrypted banking documents. While your client was busy performing his little theater of humiliation to distract the crowd, his associate was deploying a military-grade credential skimmer, attempting to clone my biometric access badge, I explained, my voice echoing clinically in the quiet room. They bypassed your own internal firewalls and attempted to inject an alteration into the master escrow payout structure housed on our Chicago servers. The code on the screen shows the exact offshore routing numbers your son attempted to hardcode into the final contract. I turned my gaze away from the lawyers and looked directly at Arthur Vance. The proud, imposing patriarch of the family was physically crumbling right in front of me. The aggressive color had completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. His breathing was shallow and erratic. "Julian is massively over-leveraged in unregulated offshore gambling syndicates," I continued, speaking slowly, letting every single word land with the devastating weight of an anvil. He attempted to siphon exactly $200 million directly into a shell account in the Cayman Islands to save his own life, hoping you would never notice the missing funds during the chaos of the transition. He committed a federal felony. Arthur. Julian let out a pathetic, high-pitched gasp. He shrank back into his ergonomic leather chair, his eyes wide and terrified, looking like a cornered rat. He did not say a word. He could not. The data was absolute. "Because of this," I said, leaning forward slightly, resting my hands on the cool mahogany table. "This acquisition is entirely dead, but Vanguard Horizon is not walking away empty-handed. Your son's attempted fraud triggered the bad actor forfeiture clause. It is a microscopic, non-negotiable fail-safe I personally embedded on page 402 of the master agreement." The attorneys looked at each other in sheer, unadulterated panic. They knew exactly what I was talking about. They had skimmed over it, assuming it was standard, unenforceable boilerplate language regarding executive behavior. They were disastrously wrong. "Because the breach was committed directly by a founding family member during the active closing window," I explained, delivering the final, fatal blow with surgical precision. "The escrow trust is not only dissolved, but Vanguard is legally entitled to seize the underlying collateral used to secure the initial bridging funds. And the collateral for a deal of this magnitude was not your real estate, Arthur. It was your intellectual property." The realization hit the room like a physical shockwave. "We are invoking our legal right to seize AeroYield's core drone patents in their entirety," I declared, my voice cold and absolute. "The $1.8 billion deal is officially dead, but as of exactly 6 o'clock this morning, Vanguard Horizon now owns 100% of your proprietary technology for absolutely nothing. We own your algorithms. We own your schematics. We own your life's work. The remaining physical assets of your company are now effectively worthless." Julian suddenly bolted upright, his breathing frantic. The arrogant Prince of Austin was hyperventilating, the terrifying reality of his actions finally crushing him. He turned wildly to his father, grabbing Arthur's expensive suit sleeve with violently trembling hands. "Dad," Dad, you have to fix this, Julian begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, wet sob. Call the governor. Call our guys in Washington. Tell them she set me up. Arthur Vance did not move to comfort his son. He slowly turned his head, staring at the trembling, sobbing man beside him. Arthur's eyes were completely dead. The empire he had spent 4 decades building had just been incinerated in less than 10 minutes because of the spoiled, arrogant boy he had created. Arthur violently ripped his arm away from Julian's grasp, staring at his own flesh and blood in utter, unfiltered disgust and horror. He had nothing left to say. There was no charm left to deploy. There was only the absolute ruin of his legacy. I calmly reached out, closed my laptop, and slid it smoothly back into my leather briefcase. The sharp click of the briefcase latch sounded like a gunshot in the devastated silence of the room. I stood up, smoothing the front of my charcoal suit. I looked down at Julian, who was now weeping openly into his hands, entirely broken. I told you it was an expensive drink, I said quietly. I turned my back on the wreckage of the Vance family, unlocked the digital doors, and walked out of the glass boardroom. As I stepped out of the building and into the bright, warm morning, Texas sun, I smiled, fully aware that my silence had spoken the absolute loudest. Thank you so much, dear listeners, for tuning in to the very end of today's story. We truly appreciate your time and would love to know where you are listening from. So please let us know your city or country in the comments section below. If you found today's story captivating and want to hear more, we urgently need your help. As we mentioned earlier, our channel has unfortunately lost its monetization on YouTube, meaning we have absolutely no budget to continue uploading videos here in the near future. We are transitioning our entire operation to Patreon, where the stories are even more intense, fully uncut, and exclusively available to our supporters. Please help us keep these true revenge stories alive by joining our Patreon community. You can easily do so by scanning the QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the direct link we have placed in the video description and the pinned comment below. Thank you once again for your incredible support. And we cannot wait to see you over on Patreon.